those whiskers of yours, those are out of control. You need a face trim. You do, baby girl. You need a face trim. In the worst way. Look at you. Like Fu Manchu. Oh. You're being filmed on a new camera. Yeah. Hello, BookTube. Somebody's feeling a little bit high on her horse right now. A little bit self-satisfied because somebody's had another mouse kill. She is slowly but surely approaching the round number of 50. She nailed yet another mouse today, so she's feeling really good. Didn't do anything with it. Just killed it dead, stood over it a bit, and then looked at me like I was going to divvy up the spoils or something like that. But I have made the law perfectly clear here, as much as I can on both sides. With Frida, I can simply talk to her. We speak the same language, and I've told her as clear as could be, if you can catch it, you can kill it. She lives here same as I do. If something is within her realm and she can catch it, then she doesn't have to ask my permission. And I've tried to make it clear to the mice here that they are perfectly welcome to live here. I don't mind mice as roommates at all, not in the slightest. The damage that they do is extremely minimal. They're easy to clean up after. They're easy to satisfy. But the happy, free, loose, fat times that they had when my two previous dogs were old and blind and slept 24 hours a day, those days are over. I've tried to make it clear to the mice here at Hyde Cottage that you're perfectly welcome to stay and have many children and stick around and eat up after me and the crumbs and whatnot, but you can't go anywhere near the floor. You have to stay on the countertops. You have to stay in the cupboards. You have to stay on the bookshelves. But you can't go anywhere near the floor. The floor is now a death zone. There is not just an animal down there who will hunt you and kill you. There's an animal down there that was bred for 300 years to hunt and kill you. Perfectly reasonable, friendly, affectionate dog, outgoing and happy and intelligent. Yes, all of those, but all of that is a fringe benefit. All of that is excess. This dog was actually made to kill mice. So I've tried to make that clear. Unfortunately, mice diverged in their evolutionary path from dogs so far ago that I cannot talk to them at all. I've tried to make it clear to them, but I have to use English, and they don't understand English. I've tried to tell them, you're perfectly willing to stick around, but don't go on the floor. Don't go anywhere near the floor, because she will hear you. And believe you me, no matter how terrified you are, no matter how close you are to shelter, no matter how fast you are, she's faster. She was bred to be faster, so it's proven true. Anyway, one way or another, we are welcome to my daily penguin. We're not talking about dogs, and we're not talking about mice. We're talking about penguins. This is my tour through that Penguin Classic wall behind me. Author by author, book by book, we're hitting the highs, we're hitting the lows. One of you pointed out the other day, and it was very nice. It was very nice of you it's nice of you all to notice and pay attention to these things. One of you pointed out something that I realized as soon as you pointed it out is actually true, which is that we haven't hit a so-called Steve book in some time. I've hit authors that I know really well. I know these authors. I tend to know these authors really well. I tend to spend time at that wall. I tend to revisit these. These are the voices of my literary world. These people and the things they have to say. It's seen in new lights, seen with new learning, seen from new perspectives. I spend a lot of time at that wall, and we've seen a lot of those authors. Authors that I know really well, and even that I esteem and love, like, for instance, Edith Wharton. But not there's a difference between that, right? Between an author that you esteem and love and someone who just puts skyrockets in your blood. And we haven't had one of those in a while, and today is not one of those either, despite the fact that I rather defiantly call today's author a Boston author. This is Edgar Allan Poe. This is a rather beaten up copy of The Fall of the House of Usher and Other Writings, which is just a new title for an older Penguin volume called The Selected Writings of Edgar Allan Poe. That older title was better, because this is a terrific collection of Poe. Basically, Gordon Pym is the only thing it's missing. It's a very generous collection of poetry. It's a good collection of his nonfiction writing. And it's The Fall of the House of Usher and a bunch of other famous tales and stories and whatnot. And it's really a really good one-stop shop for Poe. And it bugs me just a little that they changed the title, and we'll get into why. But it also bugs me that it isn't just a bit longer. If you made this thing just a bit longer, you could include the narrative of Gordon Pym of Nantucket, and then you would have a Poe. I don't understand why there isn't an 800-page Penguin volume that is just called Poe, and that has everything. I don't know why that isn't the case. I guess I do know why in a way, because these are tailored for schools, and if it's tailored for schools, you want to dice it up as much as possible and have many volumes, because teachers will buy a new volume that year. This is obviously not the Penguin collected Edgar Allan Poe that I would want. It's not the one that I would want to keep. This is another example. As we're going through this wall, we're hearing examples of books that I'm perfectly happy to talk to you about, perfectly happy to pull them off the shelf, but now that I look at them, especially in the assessing terms of a Penguin Classic wall tour, I see that I don't particularly want to keep this. I want a better Penguin volume, or maybe instead of any Penguin Classic volume of Poe, maybe the Viking Portable Edgar Allan Poe, which I don't have, or the big running press hardcover Poe, which I've had from time to time. I think I showed it on this channel at one point. I have the Library of America box set of Edgar Allan Poe's nonfiction. The reason I claim him as a Boston author is because this just happened to be where he popped out of his mother. His mother and his father were itinerant actors, and their train just happened to be in Boston when he was born. So he is technically a Boston-born author. He spent almost no time here after that. But when he was a young man, when he wasn't having arguments with his benefactors, and when he wasn't getting drummed out of West Point or any other job or whatever, a very contentious prig of an egomaniac, despite all of his talent, just insufferable to deal with, and also a drunkard from an early age, a drunkard. Not just famously for his, the famous missing week from the end of his life, but for the whole of his adult life, as you can, boy oh boy, see in the famous photograph. But before he hit it big, before in his 30s, he wrote The Raven and Other Poems, and it took off like crazy. And he helped that to take off with a very canny bit of stage theatrical readings of The Raven, and there were also stage theatrical readings by lots of other people too. Real theatrical stuff, real stops out dramatic reading of that poem and other poems. But before that, he earned his keep, just barely. But he earned great acclaim nationwide and across the ocean, in the UK as well. He earned great acclaim with nonfiction writing, with being a managing editor, with being an editorial writer, with being a book reviewer, one of the great American book reviewers. And there's a Library of America volume that has all of that nonfiction, and I have that. But I don't have any more. There's a big Fall River, a running press, Edgar Allan Poe. Fall River, I think, did the hardcover, and then it switched to running press for the paperback. It's the same publisher that does that Shakespeare on the shelf there, that big fat Shakespeare that I love so much. They do a big fat Poe volume as well, and I've had it from time to time, and I don't have it at the moment. I don't have the hardcover, I don't have the paperback, I don't have anything like that. I don't have any collected Poe at all other than this. And that's a bit of a problem, because although this is terrific, this is edited by David Galloway, and it's absolutely terrific. The notes, all of the selections, I couldn't have done a better job myself in picking and choosing the best poetry to include in here, the best critical stuff to include in here, the best tales. When it comes to poetry and critical essays, twice or even three times as much is available. So when it comes to a volume like this, you really have a changed reading experience if your editor knows what he's doing, and this one does. I still pine for a volume where you don't have to pick and choose, where you have a great critical apparatus, but it's a great critical apparatus of effectively Poe's entire works. That could be done in a Penguin Classic paperback, but I'll take this one, even though the author lays it on a little thick. I want to read you just a bit from his introduction. The introduction is very good, but it signals a problem that editors often have with Poe. And here it's not just signaled, it's sent up in fireworks. While Poe's impact on the arts in France can hardly be overstressed, and while the French are entitled to full credit for critical recognition of his genius, Poe's influence outside France has also been considerable. Robert Louis Stevenson and Arthur Conan Doyle both acknowledged their debts to Poe's work. Joseph Conrad praised the authenticity of his description of the sea. Thomas Mann found in Willie Wilson the classic example of the doppelganger theme. From Poe's tales, we not only trace the growth of the detective story, but also the science fiction genre. Poe's influence on Hawthorne is verifiable, and the argument for influence on Melville has logic, if not primary documentation, on its side. We can see in Poe early elaboration of the grotesque tradition which underlies the work of William Faulkner, and in such neglected stories as The Man That Was Used Up, a significant foreshadowing of the black humorist. It is hardly necessary, or even reasonable, to claim that in each of these instances, the score and scores of others which might easily be cited, Poe acted as a direct influence, or even when he did, as a strict determining one. Without in any way distorting his work, we can see in it not only the origins of symbolism, but a crude statement of new criticism, the stream of consciousness technique, on the ontological crises which defy any description but existential, and methods which seem to foreshadow surreal and abstract painting, even, indeed, theories of matter remarkably close to those of Einstein. To the sympathetic reader, such variety and imaginative resourcefulness are intriguing, but it is tempting to overstress Poe's influence. No kidding, Seymour. You've fallen prey to that temptation. Poe as presager of Einstein, of new criticism, of symbolism, the Dada movement, the Broadway musical. You bring it on. You can clearly see the 20th century rampant commercialization of professional basketball in the writing of Edgar Allan Poe. That kind of thing gets a little ridiculous, and editors, aficionados of this author, tend to indulge in it to a very large degree. I think part of that might have to do with the fact that they are playing to an audience of unrealized potential. With Poe, you have the active element of unrealized potential, because he was still fairly young when he died, and he died abruptly. So that leads aficionados and Poe scholars, including a couple of his greatest biographers, who often fall prey to this. It leads them to say some variation of, well, who knows what Edgar Allan Poe would have written in his 50s? Who knows how great it would have been? Who knows what he would have done if he'd written in his 50s and his 60s, if he'd lived and been healthy? And they read that back into thinking, well, if all that stuff would have been great, then everything he wrote is great. And that's not true. That's not even true of the poetry that's collected in here. Not all of it. And some of his criticism is obviously just him stem-winding in order to hit a certain word count so that he would get his measly paycheck, which he immediately drank. That's the thing that critics who love him don't want to credit. This critic, for instance, this David Galloway, in his introduction, if I remember correctly, he strikes a somewhat baffled note why Poe was always in need of money. He lived in, a single-room occupancy walk-up with virtually no overhead, and was making, if not elaborate wages, certainly regular wages as an editor, as a freelance writer, and yet he never had two pennies to rub together. It was always out. This author, if I remember correctly, if it's this introduction and not some other Edgar Allan Poe introduction, then this author makes mention of the fact that he was often in straits of genteel poverty, and often not even genteel, and that's absolutely true. And now that you can leave aside all of the garish other personal elements of Poe's life, being affianced to a 13-year-old is downright weird. I don't want to hear any historical relativism about how it was accepted practice in the day. Everyone thought it was weird then, and now it was just weird. The elaborate, theatrical, methinks thou dost protest too much extents of his grief when that wife died. It was the kind of grief that leads you instantly to say, okay, he didn't like her at all. Those elements of Poe's personal life only contribute to the tendency of his editors to claim more for him than his actual work can sustain. The actual work is amazing on its own. It's good enough just to leave it like that, which is kind of why. I'm not out of patience with this volume at all. I really like the selections. I really like the critical apparatus. But I could stand to have another Edgar Allan Poe collection. What I want, really, is that paperback. that big fat paperback in good condition. I found that Running Press or Courage Books paperback of Edgar Allan Poe at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston a few years ago. But the problem with a book that big, I mean, it's 1,500 pages long in a trade paperback, is that it very often tends to pop the pages right off the spine. And that was true with this one. It had been opened too violently at one point and it was cracked. So there was no way that I could save it. No way at all that I could save it. So I just keep looking for a nice collected Poe. I had one once upon a time, a very nice, I believe it was Fall River or some reprint house like that. It was a nice hardcover. I think it might have been UK. And I showed it on my first library tour years ago and gave it away. Somebody squealed for it, so I gave it away. And I've never found a collected Poe since then. So what I really need is more collected Poe so that I can maybe sideline this thing. The Viking portable Poe, that Running Press big Poe, maybe something like that would be good, provided that it has the wisdom of this curation, which is smart enough to include not just the famous tales and not just the famous poems, but some of the less famous poems and a lot of the nonfiction, a lot of the literary criticism that made Poe's name originally. Before he became famous for anything else, he was famous for that. What I need is a volume that does that. And I want to stress, considering what our Mega Stuff video today was like, I want to stress here that me saying that I am going to keep an eye out for that paperback collected Poe, for some nice hardcover collected Poe, for the Viking portable mass market paperback of the collected Poe, me saying that in this video is not me dog whistling for you to send me those things. Okay? I've had more than my share of presents from you people this week. It is not coded language for you to send me those things, okay? I can't believe I have to say this. I feel so incredibly lucky. I must be the only YouTuber on the entire platform that has to issue these warnings to his viewers. Nevertheless, I'm only saying the editions that I am going to keep an eye out for, not that you need to get for me, okay? You have things to deal with. Anyway, that's your Daily Penguin for today. It's Edgar Allan Poe, and as you can tell, the streak continues, because this is not... I deeply respect Poe, and I really like the stuff of his that works really well. But a lot of his stuff doesn't work really well, and critics don't like to point that out, because there's an obvious reason why. And it's the same reason why he couldn't hold two nickels together. And yet, editors and scholars will always strike a baffled tone about that. They'll say, well, we can't figure out where the money went. Any of you who have ever known an alcoholic will know perfectly well where the money went. It's not hard at all. And it doesn't miraculously fix itself. So if Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Poe, at West Point, was known to his fellow cadets to be blindingly drunk every night, well, then Edgar Allan Poe in his late 20s is also going to be an alcoholic. Unless it's not like an alcoholic. An alcoholic will very seldom sit down over a writing table and say, well, if I really want to realize my full potential, I'm pretty much going to have to rid myself of this addiction. That's not usually the way it works. And that is the answer to why Poe couldn't hold any money together, because he was falling down drunk every day of his life. And that shows in his writing. It can't help but show in his writing. We've mentioned this with other writers who are also famous drinkers, is that it can't help but show, especially if the writer effectively doesn't have a working editor. It's perfectly good if you've got somebody like Maxwell Perkins sitting there fixing your gaffes or helping you or changing your tone completely. It's different if you're in the Wild West of the American literary canon and you're turning in stuff that you wrote half in the bag. The editor's just going to run it because they need something in that space. They don't have the literary chops. In Poe's case, his editor, the main editor that he had, the one that he walked out on and that was still favorable to him, did have some fairly good literary chops. But no editor's going to have the time to rewrite your copy if it's half wandery. And that's the reason why a carefully curated volume of Poe will highlight these things. You'll be able to tell in a volume like this, or the ones that I mentioned that I don't want you to buy for me, that you'll be able to tell in those volumes right away, especially if you read them, in order. If you just read them as a book instead of picking and choosing, you'll see right away the pieces that he wrote when he was completely on his game and the pieces that he wrote when he wasn't. So because of that, because of the uneven nature of that, because of how easy some of the stuff was, which afflicts a writer, an alcoholic writer, even when they're writing sober, their alcoholism will have cost them time, and it will have cost them money, meaning they'll have to take quick jobs and they'll have no time to do them well. Even when they're doing them sober, it will still take a toll on their writing, on their output. So it's not just that. I'm not prudish enough to say that that is the main reason why. This author has never really been a bottle rocket in my blood, the way I described. We will get to those authors. I have plenty of them on this Penguin wall, and I go back to this volume. It's in rough shape mainly because I go back to it. It's just, in the case of this and so many other Penguin volumes in our tour, I can imagine what I want, and this isn't it. Believe you me, all the times, every time that we encounter a Penguin volume that is what I want, I will sing out. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is your Daily Penguin, and we will continue on tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow will be a Steve Squealing book. Maybe that's true. I'm not looking ahead, so it could be. One way or another, we'll find out together. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.